Hi everyone, as Melanie introduced, I'm Jennifer Omigie, the AI product lead here at IDBS, responsible for our AI strategy. Today what we're going to be talking about is around how you can actually scale AI with data quality. And we're framing the conversation today around two main pillars: the technology, which is AI, but also the foundation of sort of like data quality. We've been here today, we've heard a lot, and we've been talking about a lot of outcomes with AI, business outcomes, as well as the technology itself. We've talked about different models, but what we really haven't talked about is the foundation, what role data plays, and how important it is to have that data foundation in place. And I have very distinguished panelists here to sort of talk through this. So technology and AI, Bryan, I'll start with you. In your phase and what you're doing with AWS, you work with a lot of life science and health science customers. Have you got a very good use case that we can sort of use to sort of open up this conversation in terms of a use case in life science that has shown very big transformational outcomes in that organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked with a couple hundred customers in their journey, in their AI journey. And I think one of the good use cases is around Genentech and what we're doing with them. And it's very emblematic of what we see a lot of customers. How can you start small and really grow and scale your AI presence? And Genentech, what they actually did is they had a lot of manual processes with their researchers, researching what's publications, what's actually available out there today, and doing that to validate their biomarkers and their internal repos that they have today. So they actually stood up an AI agent to help automate a lot of that research, because one of the toughest problems is figuring out what's out there, what's available to you. And then that's where they actually built an agent internally and opened it up to researchers so that they can research and use that agent to research millions of publications, connecting to PubMed and other repos, and pull that information and summarize it for them so they can use that and start embedding that in their process to validate biomarkers internally. So that's just what a common pattern we've seen with a lot of customers is start with something very simple, very small in scope, and then use that use case to start building out your data foundations and your other capabilities that can really help accelerate your AI build out, because data is really foundational to that. So establishing those different capabilities within that data foundation and in small increments and seeing that value as you actually implement them, that's what I've seen most customers where they have a lot of success.
Thank you, Bryan. So we've got a lot of customers here. I'd like to get a feel, so hands up if you have sort of AI, Gen AI, or agentic AI that you have in production today and you're actually getting business outcomes from. Well, this is what I expected. So when you go to a lot of conferences, there's so many people who are interested in AI, but when it comes to the outcomes you're getting, you don't really get a lot of hands up because people are still going through that data foundation journey and trying to sort of piece together the data quality to have those sort of tangible business outcomes. Swetabh, you work with a lot of pharma customers as well. What are you seeing as sort of like those business outcome AI applications, and what are those sort of like stumbling blocks that you're seeing some of your customers experience?
I would say the biggest stumbling block is the data itself. I think often there are not enough good data foundations in place. The data is not being captured, it's not AI ready, and that limits the kind of use cases that people can deliver. But we are seeing outcomes where, AI, Gen AI are being used and they are creating ROI. So I think the kind of use case that you described, I think is very important and very usual. And you're seeing a lot of like automation happen of like routine processes, which would have otherwise taken people a lot longer. And I'm talking about like things like creating decks or researching or entering information and finding like, the right values. So those kind of use cases, I think we are seeing a lot of like automation around. But I think the biggest challenge remains like the data and whether it is sort of AI ready, it is ready to be used or not, and do you have the right data infrastructure, the foundations in place or not?
Okay. When we say the biggest challenge is the data, are we referring to the data volume, the data structure, how it's captured at source? What are we seeing as those prominent data quality issues?
Maybe I can take that up. I mean, maybe Jen knows me and strap in because it's a bugbear of mine with data. I've been in a machine or data scientist, machine learner for like 25 years, and AI is a new buzzword, but the whole technology has been around since the 50s. We've just got more computer power now, and the problem is a lot of senior management, they hook up on to this buzzwords and they want to ride this wave, but really the fundamentals are always forgotten. And because that's not a sexy topic, and now we're talking about data, it's not even on the slide, it's technology and AI, but really the fundamental is data, you know, and if you get that right, it makes your life so much easier. We probably could actually stop doing experiments today and just analyze what we have and probably come up with new drug targets already. But obviously it's not sexy enough, you're not going to get funding for that. So really you need a two-pronged approach. You need to ride the crest of the wave of the AI or whatever technology it's going to come in the future, but also do the foundational at the same time. And that's where, if you get that right, and I've not seen anyone in industry really find a solution, there's a sort of puzzle pieces that have been put together, but it's not a joined up approach. And I think if the first person in the industry, in any industry, to get that right will be a front runner. It doesn't matter if they're not that advanced with the technology. And I think in my team now, what we're trying to do is the two-pronged approach. We're trying to look at the technology, but also trying to get the foundation right. And that needs a lot of stakeholder management, and needs a lot of agreement. And there's no right or wrong way, but you definitely need to invest in there. And I think people are now coming to the realization that now they have to emphasize or put resources into that, because 25 years ago or 30 years ago, there was actually a bottleneck in creating data. You know, there was a lot of experiments that actually, that bottleneck has gone with a lot of like high throughput technologies. Now the data problem isn't the issue, it's the analysis. So the foundation is now coming into focus. So I'm a big advocate for this boring topic maybe in some people's eyes, but I know that if we get that right, we will outcompete our competitors.
Thank you, Stephen. Bryan, I'm going to go back to that Genentech example and sort of relate it back to trust and the human factor. So with that example, what were the hurdles around trust and the human factor to get the clinicians and the scientists to actually trust the AI output?
Yeah, I think a couple things there I would mention. It's not working. A couple things I would mention there is there's definitely a trust factor. What helps that is actually getting the AI agent in their existing workflow that they have today. So a lot of customers, they never progress out of the POC stage. They don't get a lot of value from POCs. There's POC burnout. So that's where you got to pick a proof, a proof of value is what we call it, where you see the value up front and you embed it into the workflow that they're doing today. So they're not having to context switch out of, the tools that they're used to using today to start working with the AI agent. So that's one aspect of the trust. Obviously, there's responsible AI. So you've got to do your due diligence around detecting bias of the data. All the aspects and dimensions of responsible AI, they have to be in place, as well as traceability, auditability, to capture everything that the AI is doing and be able to replay that back. And then I would say lastly, it's really important to iterate with the AI. So not only you've trained the AI up front, you've exposed it some of your private data, but having that clinician or the researcher work with the AI to guide it. So you can store that data back into your data foundation, and it can almost serve as a training signal for that AI going forward. So I think those are some important aspects of it, as well as establishing the guardrails as to what the AI can actually do and cannot do from a policy perspective.
Thank you. Stephen, I'm going to direct a question at you in terms of Boehringer Ingelheim. How are you seeing the sort of trust in human factor change in your organization and the change management that's happening around that?
I mean, one of the things is that, you know, we're in a very conservative industry, so people are reluctant to try things out unless they know the outcome. And of course, when you're doing new technologies, that's not the case. So I would love to be able to say, here, we do this step A, B, C, and the outcome will be D. That doesn't really work in science. It never has. It probably never will do. So all we are trying to do is show successes or highlight the successes. But of course, you know, for all the successes we have, there's a lot of failures. So you can't really wait. It's like a chicken and egg situation. You can't really wait for the perfect scenario. So it's actually a mindset change that we need to have, which really is to be brave, you know, is to try things out. Like I said, I've got a machine learning background, and a lot of the projects that we've worked on at the start, so we had an idea of what we would like to do. You know, that's the trust, that's we do this, and we get this out, but really what happens on the journey, you go a different way because you see something from the results that's more interesting. And I have a feeling you just need to start, and the trust will come because you really need to just get a feeling of what is possible. And then, you know, even this AI topic now, it reminds me of the .com era. And I'm that old, sorry.
Yeah.
And I know that, you know, there's going to be some winners, there's going to be some losers. But if you're part of the journey, you get a better understanding. And I'm using tools now still from 20 years ago because that's the way. You just take a piece here, you take a piece there, put it together and do something different. And I'm sure even after AI, there'll be another technology that we'll have to learn. So if anybody's struggling now, get used to it because there's going to be something new in the future. And so, you know, our organization, we are not waiting for the perfect solution. We are trying things out. I mean, just for example, in the whole of our department, every person has to create an agentic AI solution, either with the business, you know. So we're really trying to encourage people to embrace the change, try to get away from that pharmaceutical, conservative, regulatory mindset, and then allowing the people to fail, you know, to say failure it's not a failure, as long as you learn from it and move forward, especially in new technology. So going back to your question, trust is not something you can, there's no silver bullet there. You need to just go through this journey and it will come from the results.
Okay. Swetabh, do you agree? Do you have anything else you would like to add in terms of that human factor, trust, and the technology?
Yeah, I think there is, I mean, sometimes I think, like, you know, as was referred to, like, you know, cynicism about the technology and its outcomes. So that's definitely a part of the process. But I think more and more people are seeing the good outcomes. Like, I think, you know, the fact that a lot of organizations have adopted LLMs and adopted them broadly, I think definitely helps. Like, you know, they are seeing some outcomes of the technology and can see how powerful it is. And that leads to a scenario where I think, you know, I feel like there is more openness to adopting AI technologies. But the trust, I mean, you know, has to be earned, like, and that's not, it's not a single day event. It's a continuous process. So, you know, the same iterations over and over, and showing, I think the kind of things like traceability and explainability help a lot. So, are you able to explain what the AI has done and why certain decisions were made? Are you able to be not, you know, I think anything which is a black box is probably hard to build trust around, especially in the sciences. So, you know, if it's not a black box, if you show the trace and then explain it and give the right foundations, then I think you know, we can earn trust of the practitioners, and so definitely seeing a lot of that. Yeah.
Okay. Bryan, you mentioned a lot of people are doing POCs and not really getting outcomes, and you just said openness to trust. Do you also think what's changing in the industry as well is openness to failure? Because as Stephen said, it's a very similar era to .com where everyone's trying different things and we're all exploring, but exploring openly. Are you seeing sort of like a change in the industry where there is that openness to at least fail? So fail 9 times and maybe succeed once.
I think depending on the area within the business, obviously, and I think that's why it's really key in the use case you actually choose, so that it provides ROI, provides value, and innovation for the company, but it's not at the spear, it's not at the critical point for the company where you can violate some of the regulations or cause a major disruption. But yeah, so I think educating some of our customers on, hey, here's some of the use cases we're seeing. Think about how you evaluate the use cases that actually delivers ROI, but it's not going to, be a safety issue, for example. Okay. So that's why a lot of folks are starting in the research area, because there's a lot of manual processes in that area, and it's able to really provide a lot of automation and benefit.
Okay. So I'm going to open it up for the audience to ask a question. I can see there's a hand up. So if you can just say your name, what company you're from, and the question you have.
Hi, Liz. Yes, hi. I've got a question in terms of, are you starting to see any organisations starting to change their programmes of research away from the traditional kind of processes and use cases that they currently have, to doing, say, experiments which are there purely to augment the data sets to train the models?
Maybe I can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay?
Yeah,
sure. So, great question. Some of you might already know that we've just, at Boehringer, just created an innovation hub in King's Cross in London, and that's just completely in silico. So, they're not using any wet lab data, they're using big data sets that have already been done clinical trials, and looking how we can, build upon using just in silico data. So I think that's nothing new, but now I think some organizations are taking it more serious. This was always like a side project that supported wet lab experiments, and now we're seeing the change where maybe in silico will either equal or even overtake in the future. That's what I'm seeing. So I'm seeing a change in the industry now, maybe 20 years too late, but better late than never, that we're going into like an in silico analysis, because of also costs wise, you can do a lot more. Sorry, Bryan.
I think
Okay.
same thing.
Okay. Another question from the audience? Do you have a second question before we move on to the second pillar?
I have a question. Hi, Tom Lilly from Danaher. You mentioned something interesting, which is something along the lines of no company has really figured out how to institutionalize structuring their data. I would say the one exception is new labs. So if there's a new lab in the last couple of years and they already had the use case, actually there were some great talks this morning about start with the use case, then decide your data structure, then collect the data. So in those cases where it's a newer lab, they knew they were going to use AI, I think they've been structuring data appropriately and have been using it successfully. But compare that to just mining the decades worth of data that already exists. Are you seeing use cases for that as well, or is it mostly just new labs, new experiments that were specifically designed around AI?
A lot of it depends on where the funding is what I'm seeing. So if they have a project, if they have funding, that's usually where they're starting, and seeing how they can adopt AI as part of that.
I think. Yeah, I mean, I could add, I think definitely seeing a lot around historical data and that's present. So people are definitely looking at data that has already been generated and trying to make sense of it. Like that is something that I think a lot of companies are interested in and are investing into that as well.
And I think it goes hand in hand with the data foundation, because if you look at your historic data, you realize where the gaps are and realize where you need to maybe collect more metadata in the future. So it's actually a good exercise to do, to look at the past to sort of prepare for the future. So I see that a lot already as well, and I think it's a good push for the organizations to see, look, if we'd collected this data in the past, we could have been a bit further ahead now. So even in more traditional or historical companies, I think that looking back at your data as a value.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the second pillar. Well, I think this is...
One more question.
Okay. Okay. No, go ahead.
My name is Ingelheim at Bayer Cross Science, and I have a question more about the implementation or kind of handling. You're working with so many employees with a multitude of backgrounds, what fields that they work in your companies. How do you ensure standardized digital fluency, that people understand that this is not a human, try to do courses. We've tried multiple different things. So I'm just curious to see how you guys get with that.
I think it's a continuous loop. So to getting that team readiness, right, and having them adopt the tools in their current workflows, becoming more of an everyday tool that they use, just part of their day-to-day. I think it's a continuous education and loop. It's not one event. It's more just continually showing them the capabilities of the tool, the guardrails of the tool, and what they can get outcome-wise.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just say it out loud. Because I think some of that distrust that we were talking about earlier with AI in general, or distrust, or almost too much stress, right, comes from that digital fluency piece. And it's just so hard. Everyone with having their day jobs, people from leadership that, hey, stop what you're doing, learning this thing on top of delivering. I know there's no perfect answer. Really just curious.
I think that's also where it's key to get the AI in their workflow. So it's not a side project for them. It's part of their standard workflow, and they're using it every day very naturally.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think I'm a big advocate of lifelong learning, and like I said, this is one technology. There will be something new, and I think everybody in this room or in any organization needs to reserve time, to have time to invest in yourself, to learn new topics. The resources out there are nearly endless, and I know that can be quite overwhelming, but I think there's never a right or wrong way. For me, you just need to get your hands dirty. There's a lot of shadow IT or groups, there's a lot of training, internal, external, and I think if you have the right mindset of just to learn something new every day, then it doesn't become such a big hurdle, where if you're not used to that, or maybe your role doesn't allow you to do that, I think every organization should allow their employees to have a certain amount of time dedicated to this lifelong learning approach, because I think it benefits the company in the long run.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to pillar 2, which is about data quality. I think we'll take further questions at the end of pillar 2, if that's okay. Yeah. And I think this is a very apt quote in terms of before you have your AI ice cream, you should actually eat your data vegetables. So moving to sort of data quality and what we see as the foundations, I'm going to ask each of you, what is AI-ready data to you? This is something that we hear a lot, my data is AI-ready, or we're preparing our data to be AI-ready. What is AI-ready data to you, Bryan?
Yeah, I think there's a scale there of what AI-ready is based on what I've seen customers evaluating it. So first, establishing that data foundation that is highly scalable, because AI needs more scale than what they've seen previously. With a lot of on-premise data stores, for example. So having that scalability in the cloud really helps from an AI-ready perspective. Also, we talked about a little bit earlier, eliminating the silos of data. So using those use cases to bring in multiple data sets that have been traditionally siloed in on-premise systems, and bringing those together in an aggregate way that you can start applying and bringing that AI to that. And then I would say lastly is curating that data, building metadata around the data so that AI can start using the metadata. So traditionally we've built data catalogs, we've done FAIR principles around manual processes and humans. And that's where we need to start thinking about, we need to collect the metadata for the agents and for the machines so that they can actually read the data quality, they can understand the provenance, the lineage, even the quality scores of the data, and then apply that as part of their reasoning.
Thank you. Swetabh, what would you say is AI-ready data for you?
I think AI-ready data is, in many ways, an extension of what FAIR principles have already talked about. Like I think, a lot of it comes down to whether your data is fair or not, but you want the data consistently processed, harmonized, co-located. You want AI to be able to identify and search and query the right data. So I think it's building sort of the foundations around AI rather than around humans. I think humans have a certain way of analyzing data and looking at it. And there's a lot of context there which is often implicit, but for AI, a lot of that context has to be made explicit. So you want to have the right metadata, you want to have like standardized processing, you want to remove any kind of artifacts that are there in the data, or even have categorical variables that you can then use to train your models on. So I think it's thinking smartly about what the use cases might be, and then laying your data foundations in a way that your AI can actually understand and interpret the data, and I think that's very important. So that's a journey as well. Like I think not all AI ready, all data can be AI ready for all purposes, at one go, but it's something that you have to continuously work upon. But there's a lot of positives to that, and if AI can identify your data and search and query it, and be able to put that into models, your data scientists can use the data easily. That has a lot of benefits. So that's what AI data is for us. Yeah.
Thank you. And Stephen, I will ask you from a lab informatics perspective, what is AI-ready data to you?
I mean, I can only ditto everything that's been already spoken about, but what I can talk about maybe lab specific, is that I think we need to really change the way that we approach data, or even experimental data. Is even before we even start anything, we should already be thinking about what's the primary use of what the data we're going to create, and what's the secondary use, what's the tertiary use. So if you go to any pharmaceutical industry, they're mainly looking, let's say, for themselves. And I think we need to have this bigger picture, or for the greater good mentality, to say, I don't need this data, but other people may do. And I think having that mindset from the start to say, how can other people use the data I generate in different workflows further down the sort of drug discovery pipeline, again, is a mindset shift, which is difficult to do in a fast-paced environment where you need to create results. But I think we do need to, if we want to, this wave that we're doing with AI now will actually peter out if we don't take advantage of it, because people will lose interest. They will say that's AI slop, and then there'll be the next big thing. And I think if you really want to gain some benefits, we really need to, and I'm really happy that we're talking about the data, and if this is any take-home message from anything I've said, is that everybody should really think about, before they create data, what would you like to use it for? What do other people want to use it for? And what do I need to collect? Because if you get that right, I mean, I'm a data scientist. 95% of the work I was doing in the past was data curation, data massaging. The 5% was the machine learning, putting the cherry on the cake, and we want to get away with that. And then if we get that data part right, we can all then do the machine learning part, and that will be so much beneficial, actually a bit more fun than cleaning data. Mm-hmm. So I think it's in our best interest.
Okay. Just going back to sort of data, I think today what we've heard a lot is around sort of data governance and that data quality. What would you say, in your experience, is the biggest challenge around data? Is it the governance? Is it the change management around AI? Where would we place that?
I would say the governance, because that's more of the people function, people process. So if it's new to an organization, that's where they struggle initially. And getting that right is so important to having that harmonization and interoperability across these different data sets, having those cross-functional teams working together in a very governed way, and establishing up that framework initially.
Okay. So when we talk about AI, your question is actually quite perspective to the next question I'm about to ask. Who actually owns AI? Would we say it's the IT team? Is it the business team? Is it the end user who's a scientist? Because when we're talking about capturing that data resource and ensuring that there's that data quality from the beginning, and thinking about secondary and tertiary use of that data, where do we see that ownership in terms of a data governance perspective?
So I think it's everyone, right? So it's a cross-functional team.
Yeah.
You establish those domain teams. I think we had some good presentations earlier today on that, where they own the data product. They own the quality of that product. They work with other teams, though, from a governance perspective, a centralized governance, to determine how is this product being used across the organization? What are the interfaces to this product? So that you can start plugging in these data products and getting the maximum reuse across the organization for a lot of different use cases.
Thank you. Swetabh, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think the data governance piece is challenging and complicated. But I think success on AI, I guess success on any other initiative, has to be cross-functionally owned. You need the business users to sign off, but IT definitely plays a big role in evaluating security and all the other concerns around data privacy and so on. So I think you need a cross-functional perspective to understand whether these technologies can be implemented and can be implemented well. But I think the business teams have to have ownership of the outcome, and that will lead to building trust finally. Otherwise these may remain interesting proofs of concept that never get converted. So I think you do need a cross-functional ownership of the outcome.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to what we see as sort of fair data. I don't think you go to any AI conference without fair data sort of making a feature, and everyone talk about how data needs to be fair. And sometimes it's spoken of as an aspirational standpoint. Do you think we're now at a place where it's going from being aspirational to more of a reality?
Let me just share my experience, which is just maybe just my personal experience. I think still we're quite far away. I mean, it's talked about a lot. People think it's done and dusted. I think still there's a long way to go. I think there's certain areas. I see it in the clinical aspect, very well regulated, very well governed, and in the research area, it's spoken. But I don't know whether it's really lived, and I still think that it's hard for people to accept when they don't see the benefit for themselves, immediately, and also with the data governance and you don't see a benefit maybe for 5 or a long time down the line, and that's too far away for most people to grasp, why should I do that? It's hard to get the motivation, and it doesn't matter how many presentations you do or how many times you talk about the topic, people listen, but to actually live it is a different thing, and I still think we're not quite there yet.
Would you agree, Bryan?
Yeah, totally concur. But I do think I'm very optimistic about the future and AI agents and how the machines need to start using a lot of the principles of FAIR, such that when you start building that autonomous agents, it's going to need all those aspects of discovery, accessibility, interoperability, reusability, and it'll be part of the automations of those agents, I think, going forward. But I think we're still very early days, and it's more manual processes today, and maybe since the humans are using those components, it's not at the forefront.
Okay. So that's anything you'd like to add around that?
No, I think FAIR is a continuous journey as AI readiness is, and I think you still do see a lot of scope for improvement, where I think there might be more conversation than actual work, and we are still at a point where a lot of data is being generated. It's not necessarily being stored in a fair way, and it's not accessible and interoperable, and that needs to change, I think, for successful AI outcomes, because I think AI readiness is a superset, if you will, of FAIR principles. So definitely need the practitioners to recognize why FAIR is important and push for it more. But it's a long journey, and I think the industry has been sometimes slow to change and react. So
Okay. I'm going to open up to the audience. We've got 5 minutes for questions, and then the panelists will give us their sort of closing remarks. Any questions?
Hi, Lily from Pathak.
So you guys talked about governance, right? Data governance. Obviously, there's also governance for AI use cases. I'm just wondering whether you guys have any ideas or insights on how you establish that governance. And secondly, there's risks associated with using AI, right? So has any companies here, thought about the risk controls and risk mitigation? And then the third question is that there are so many AI tools and models out there. I'm just curious how your company is dealing with, use these tools. Do you have your company like tenant of AI, tools, or do you just like your employees use cloud, OpenAI, and without much intervention?
A lot of questions. Bryan, do you want to start?
I can share my
Yeah.
experience working with customers is typically the organization has their own tenant. They're putting the guardrails in place for the AI so that it has only approved actions that it can or cannot do. And typically there is also a human in the loop for many aspects of it. So from a compliance standpoint, that's how people are starting out to learn and get familiar and build that trust with AI. But I think a key part of that is establishing those trusted guardrails and policies, which most cloud providers have today, as to the boundaries in which AI can actually act.
Thank you.
Maybe I can answer that because I've seen that's exactly how it's implemented in my organization. And on top of that, now we're also having legal involved, where now they've built a tool where we actually put our use cases in, and they can sort of estimate the risk, and then obviously if it's a low risk AI project, it will get the green light quite quickly, and if it's an amber or red, then there might need to be some more investigations there. So they are not allowing a wild west of building things and deploying them. There is some sort of governance behind it, not just the ring fence, but also what we're doing, because in a regulated environment, you need to be careful maybe of what you implement. And I think that's a really good way to go. I think it gave us the scope to allow freedom to operate, but also in a controlled environment.
I do have a question. So, Stephen, you started off by saying, everybody's talking about AI, it's sexy. You want to bring it into your, organization. But to bring a new technology in, there has to be a material business impact, right? And so what I would be interested to know is how are your organizations and the ones you're working with monitoring and tracking impact of your AI strategy? Right, what metrics are you tracking? How are you valuing that as part of a investment to the business?
Yeah, for what the customers I've worked with, it really varies, but they are establishing and picking the use cases based on those ROI metrics. So is it, time saving can be a metric, dollar saving can be a metric. A lot of times those go hand in hand, right? But it also could be other metrics around innovation for the company. This is a totally new business area that they want to explore. So I think that's where the defining those metrics and what pillars you want to judge the use cases really helps to narrow down on a use case that actually will provide value for the organization.
And maybe I can add as well, when there's a new hype, I think most organizations allow freedom without looking at costs because they just want to see how things develop. They don't want to miss the boat. So then they try and then as you see it mature, and I guess you will see it with AI in the next 2 to 5 years, there'll be some winners and then there'll be some standards and then you'll see more governance and then you'll see more questions about, okay, you want to do AI? Okay, you need to go through this body, you need to request the money and you need to show what the return on investment will be on. At the moment, if you're new into innovation or interested in innovation, it's a great time now because now you can play. That door will close at some point, But then there'll be another thing that you can play with. So I guess that's the cycle. It's open, Wild West, consolidation, and then probably very governed about who does what when.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Evan from CSL. We talked a lot about kind of metadata and kind of context around that in order to really make that work for AI. My question is how do you capture that metadata without making it cumbersome for the end user? Or what have you seen and what have you done to make that happen?
Well, I can speak to what we're doing at AWS. So we've actually developed in our tool set LLM capabilities that help generate a lot of the metadata for you. So profiling the data, creating data quality agents to score the data, and then have a human in the loop that actually validates that. But using the LLMs to help fill some of that gap.
I think what I would add to that is also when you're designing the systems, the user experience. I think we're so used to designing for humans in terms of user experience, and now we need to start designing for machines as well when we put in that user experience so that the metadata is captured at source. And it's easy for the user, because if I have to put in 10 clicks to put in the metadata, I'm not going to do it. So yeah. So we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask our panelists to give us sort of like their closing remarks. And the closing remark really is, what do you think it would truly take to trust things like agentic AI, and what would you think it would take for it to be a success?
I think what it would take for agentic AI to be successful, I think we have talked a lot about in this conversation, is sort of the data foundation and a lot of guardrails around, what kind of use cases are permissible or not. And of course, showing the ROI in clear ways to the business. I think the technology itself is very interesting, but any wider adoption requires a lot of focus on the ROI and demonstrating it in very clear ways. Till that happens, I think agentic AI will be interesting, but not necessarily widely adopted. But I think what it takes for agentic AI to be successful is cross-functional ownership, the right data foundations, and the right use cases. So I think those 3 things I would say.
Bryan?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. The only aspect I would add is that auditability and explainability, right? So when you're working with a very highly regulated environment, they want to be able to understand and see why it actually made certain decisions and be able to roll those back if you need to.
I'd maybe like to go to the next level, which is, I've already explained that I've been a data scientist, and there is black boxes and there is some machine learning algorithms which you can't explain. I'd like to see us get to the position where we actually trust the data. Where somebody gives a no-go decision based just on the data without knowing why. If we can get there, then I think then we've cracked it. We're very far away, but if someone, that would be my utopia, is we trust the data. I mean, I've got a lot of machine data or data scientists that do that. That's not embedded in the culture of the organization, of course, but if senior management make a decision purely on the algorithm's output, then I would die a happy man.
With that, we'll close this panel. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you.